And as always, we aren't really live.
Yeah.
But
I know the spiel.
Yeah, I'll do the same as I've done before.
All right. Hello, Internet, and welcome to another issue of Planetary from your co-hosts at Never Stay Dead.
Or an episode featuring 2 issues.
Right. There you go. I'm co-host number 5, Matt.
And I am co-host Infinity -1, Damian.
That's complicated math right there.
Yes. You can stop and think about that for a while.
And today we're going to be covering issues 2 and 3 of Planetary. If you haven't, more so than usual, I would recommend going back an episode and checking out episode 1, where we only talk about issue 1, but in establishing Planetary, there was a fair amount to cover.
Right. And we don't know for sure, but we'll probably continue on with 2 issues an episode. Maybe we'll try 3 at some point if it feels right.
Yeah, we'll do what fits for an episode as we go.
But yeah, so this continues our experiment of trying something issue by issue, basically. An experiment I'm so far enjoying a lot. I really enjoyed reading both these issues, and
one issue in,
I've kind of blanked my mind, and I only remember a few details of where all this is going. So it's almost like reading it the first time.
I read a healthy chunk of Planetary years ago before it had ended, because the ending was so delayed, and reading it again, I had very little, like I have a few specific memories, but very few. So this is really fresh and really exciting.
Yeah. Well, so issue 2 features an island called Island 0, which is covered, or scattered about it is the corpses of giant kaiju monsters. One that looks like Mothra, one that looks like a starved Godzilla. And the issue starts with us following a group who is a small band of I don't know, I think a Japanese author and his students, perhaps, or no, his members of his cult, basically. And
that's what I got. Yeah.
And they don't know that the kaiju are there. They're there to cleanse themselves spiritually before they take over the Japanese government with Sarin Gas and guns. And in theory, make themselves over into an emperor, or make their leader over into an emperor. He calls himself the Master Storyteller. And he looks a lot like the famous... Well, maybe I should quickly go over the whole plot, but he looks a lot like the famous Japanese author, Yukio Mishima.
Because we're doing the whole issue, I say go for your connection, and then we'll talk about the plot as this unravels.
Okay. Well, I guess most people will have read the comic before listening, but I just wanted to, I kind of like a quick overview when I'm listening to things before I hear the details. So basically, they discover the giant monsters, and then the crazy cult leader wants his followers to eat the rotting flesh of the monsters. And he has one of his followers who balks at eating stuff like that, and has been a little bit more the doubting Thomas than the rest of the followers. And that fellow ends up getting shot. And on a parallel plot, we follow our 3 planetary adventurers who've been called into the Japan office, the Japan Planetary Office, and kind of get briefed on Island 0. And then they quickly take a flight over to Island 0 to, for some reason, stop these people from seeing the dead monsters on the island, because no one's supposed to know about them. But they arrive too late. The cult is confronted by some small contingent of Japanese guards who are guarding the island, and they use sarin gas to kill themselves and the guards. and then our titular heroes arrive and can't save the day or anything, and they just say, let's kind of clean things up before the next set of guards comes over. And at the very end of the story, they see a giant monster fly overhead. And so the monsters are coming back. So maybe you were right. Maybe we should have just gone blow by blow through that. But there we are. I already blew it. So this fellow, the leader, who calls himself the master storyteller, and his real name is Ryu, he looks like an older version of Yukio Mishima, the very famous and kind of strange author from Japan, who was I kind of think of him as maybe a bit like Japan's Ernest Hemingway in the post-war era. From what I've read, he became famous very young. When I was young, I read some of his novels. They were interesting, but I don't know if I really understood them very well at the time. And he became obsessed with kind of the samurai code, or whatever it's properly called, and physical fitness later in his life, and developed this sort of uber conservative point of view about how the emperor should take control of Japan and return to the kind of empire of Japan of the old days. And he tried to foment an uprising with the military, which did not work. And here I have this picture of him trying to talk to the military into rising up and putting the emperor back on the throne, so to speak. And when that did not work, he committed public, I can't pronounce it right, seppuku, ritual suicide with a sword, and killed himself.
It's a little sword. And technically, you need someone else with you because you can't actually fully disembowel yourself.
I think he did have other people with him, the other members of his little rebellion group. So I was quite surprised. I do remember this from the first time I was reading. Quite surprised to read this and realize that they were combining this crazy author with the story of Monster Island from the Godzilla movies and others.
Yeah, no, it's great. And just to go off that for a second, this is why I wish works like Planetary had a true and academic kind of annotation put to it. And unlike how DC has published annotations in the past, I'd prefer a more traditional annotation, which actually would just be a separate book for like the entire Planetary series, where especially with comics, it would be so easy, issue 2, page 3, panel 4.
Right, exactly.
Here's the little note that you
could just make a small paperback book of it or something.
Right. And I think that would be brilliant for a few reasons. A, it could help people access the comic and understand different things. And possibly if Ellis was to go through and kind of show those annotations, it would give a more, authorial look behind the series in a way. Not that you'd get every note because you wouldn't be getting the script, but some of those ideas. But also that connection you made is something that is completely foreign to me. I had never heard of this guy before, so there's no way for me to make that connection. But I'm interested to learn more, but I need that nugget. I need that connection in order to do more, to read more, to learn more from the comic.
Right. And it's almost like it's wasted that this stuff is in there, but you can't easily access it.
Right. It reminds me of, in a way, my dad, when I didn't know how to spell a word, he said, go look it up in the dictionary. And I just give him this look like I can't. And so much has changed now. If you don't know how to spell a word, you can get there a lot more easily. You can shout it at your phone, it will bring it up for you, and you can learn. But it's that kind of connection of you need a certain amount of education and knowledge to then grow that knowledge, and sometimes that connection has to come from a source. And it would just be so lovely, especially for Planetary more than any other comic I can think of to have this kind of a resource.
Right. And even like, I guess I could do more research on the kaiju. I know there was like a 3-headed flying creature in some of the Godzilla movies I saw as a kid, but I can't remember his name. But here's the skeleton of him, half buried in a muddy slope, I guess.
Right. So these are all what Toho, Godzilla, kaiju in here specifically, although they kind of embody the genre. So,
right. And it's a intriguing but hard to complete. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can interpret combining Japanese terrorist group kind of thing with the kaiju monsters, which seem to be usually a nuclear fear kind of metaphor for the most part.
Right.
Although I'm sure the metaphors of giant monsters spread out into a lot of different areas.
Well, I mean, the metaphor is so established with the original Godzilla, and then when you move forward, those movies lose their literary intentions. And
well, there's something inherently cool about just giant monsters.
Yeah, and I mean, the last 10 minutes of those movies are fun, but the rest of it.
Yeah, you almost want just someone to edit, maybe someone has, just edit all the good monster fights from all those movies into one movie.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing double-page spread here where, we find the giant Mothra. Body of Mothra. I mean, they don't call it Mothra, but I'm calling it Mothra. And that sense of perspective, where humans are suddenly small. That's an interesting sort of science fiction or science experience, where nature kind of, the giant monsters kind of exaggerate that feeling we have sometimes when we face some huge thing in nature or other kind of things along those lines.
And your digital pull-up there of that Mothra page is kind of losing some of the impact because that's a double-page spread.
Right, and the digital version is shrinking it here.
Yeah. And
it has a huge impact in my trade or in the comic book.
Oh yeah, do you want to go to your horror film view of the comic?
Oh, I don't know. I kind of decided the digital was easier on the eye overall.
Just so you know what I'm talking about, before we started filming, he was showing me the issue and then he was hovering his can of whatever he's drinking right over
now I want to do it for the video.
Looking like he's going to set it down and leave a ring, and it's giving me heart palpitations.
I just have to fiddle around here a bit to get that view again. Yes, the horror of the can hovering over the comic book.
Stop it, I'll talk. Oh.
I'm going to pour it on there now. But yeah, so, and it should be said, the kaiju, the sort of rotting, decrepit kaijus are lovingly drawn by, suddenly blanking on John Cassaday, the artist, does such a fabulous job. And this issue seems like, I enjoyed the art in the first issue, but this issue, the art seems to go up a notch. Now,
I think we've seen Cassaday a little early, and we're seeing him here, watching him grow very quickly as he's...
Yeah. And maybe he's getting more excited about this project and putting more of himself into it.
Yeah,
and the coloring is great too. For 1999 coloring, very nice. So it's one thing I found with reading this issue and rereading it is there's a lot of unfinished business, right? There's a lot of little clues about things, which is part of, I guess, along with sort of the odd juxtaposition of the terrorists and the monsters. There's also just a lot of other little things thrown out there that maybe we should think about later, or maybe we don't need to think about later. I'm not quite sure.
Well, and I think a lot of that, what you're talking about, actually happens earlier in the comic when we're in the Tokyo Planetary office.
Right.
And they have a representative there. I don't even know if I can say his name. Shinya?
Shinya
S-H-I-N.
Fukuda.
All right.
Shinya Fukuda, chief of the Japanese planetary station.
And he doesn't like drummer, which seems to be a common thought there. But the way he talks about it is, I think, says a lot about Planetary and its mysterious kind of leanings, because here's this kind of like trope hacker character, but he doesn't know much about the organization he works for either, but he knows all about these kinds of issues going on that are supposed to be kind of hush-hush.
Right. Somehow Planetary, not only in this issue, not only is Planetary know all this secret information, but they are somehow part of the cover-up of this island, keeping it away from the public. And that's not quite explained. And I'm trying to find it. There's a moment he says that Fukuda says, "The new guy, I'm pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you," talking about Winter. And Winter says, "I don't feel like a new guy." And he says, "You don't much look like one either." But it sort of hints that there's something more to the whole story about Winter. I mean, we know that he's lived nearly 100 years. And then very shortly afterwards, we learn that he's known how to speak Japanese fluently since 1925. And we get a repetition of the idea that whenever he walks into the room turns cold.
Well, the room doesn't turn cold until this guy calls him old, which again shows an emotional reaction and him kind of...
Did it just get colder in here?
Right.
I hadn't made that connection at all. That's very good. So when he's annoyed, he can make the room colder.
Which makes it seem like an involuntary response also.
Right. And we do see him later in the story use his cold to make the sarin gas kind of freeze and fall to the ground.
Yeah.
How does he explain it? He says, "Heat subtraction, I'm impressed," says Chiquita to him.
Right. After freaking out about the gas, which is really interesting because, I mean, we're only 2 issues in, but this is the only time she's been shown to lose her cool.
Right. Because she, in fact, we see in this that she has supervision. She can see a mile away what stuff that Winter can't see. All I see is a green blob in the distance. We have to be a mile away from it, where she said she's seen one guy waving around a gun. And then she runs at super speed. And I think we've already seen that she has some kind of super strength, right?
Yeah. So she's basically a Captain America type, souped up.
But she can't. Yeah, she's not invulnerable because she's very scared of the sarin gas.
I would be too.
She calls it. And only because maybe I noticed that the cult leader looked like this famous author, I then noticed Fukuda. Where is it? He refers to the group that's gone to the island, saying a mildly infamous Japanese novelist and 5 acolytes. They have that Yukio Mishima Ayum Shin Raiko smell about them. Ayum Shin Raiko was the group who famously released sarin gas in the Japanese subway.
Oh.
And I just remembered a long time ago, sarin, that was 1995. I looked it up, and this is 99. I remember it in the news, but I did not retain any details. But so I looked it up tonight, and that was a cult led by a blind cult leader, a blind religious leader who declared himself to be both Christ and the Buddha. And part of the plan of releasing the Sarin was to make him the new emperor of Japan. So his was actually a much nastier cult than Mishima's cult, in the sense that all Mishima wanted to do was return the emperor to his power. But this guy wanted to be Christ and to be the emperor, kind of a god emperor, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think Warren Ellis loves just mixing all this stuff together. I'm not
but
sure
you can
how
also
much it
see
plays.
cultural ties, and so he's mixing
Right.
stuff that has some sort of tapestry that's pulling from the same place.
It's kind of like two kinds of apocalypse, I suppose. There's the apocalypse of really crazy terrorists who think they're going to become a god emperor, and the apocalypse of giant monsters.
Well, and what's also interesting there is not just the apocalypse angle, but like the idea of rebirth with it as well. Because at the end, you have all this death, but at the end, it's that one. I mean, it just looks like a dinosaur more than a kaiju. But there's kind of like this majesty and beauty in that one bit, and it's the one time we've kind of seen Janeka smile, and it's something pretty miraculous.
Right.
You know,
Winter says, "I thought you said they died off," and Chiquita says, "I did. Isn't that great?" And she's just smiling. And it kind of reminds me of the ending of the first issue. They were kind of looking over the mountaintop. I forgot what they were saying, but it's like in the end of the first issue, they were looking over the landscape, and kind of a similar mountaintop to what we're seeing here, with this time the monster flying over it. And Winter said, "It's a strange world," and Chiquita said, "Let's keep it that way." It's like, on one level, we're just enjoying these mysterious wonders,
right?
And because there's no closure to this story, and there really was no closure to issue 1 either. I do think a lot of things come back. I know elements of issue 1 definitely. I have enough memory of remembering that stuff comes back, but at this point, it's almost like we're being tossed out lots of fascinating story fragments, which I seem to love. I seem to love all these semi-connected pieces.
Well, the other thing is, this issue in particular is at a breakneck pace. Like, every frame, every page has stuff going on, and it moves, and it reads a lot more like an older comic in that respect. But it's not an older comic in practice as well. It's a very interesting alchemy of comic creation.
I mean, unlike an older comic, the heroes don't save the day. In fact, they aren't the prime movers of the action. The action happens, and they almost just observe it and come in to clean up afterwards. Yeah. But that's a very good insight, because I wasn't thinking about how this follows the old dictum of plunge you right in the middle of the action to start the comic.
But not quite in medias res either. Like, it's just fast.
Right.
The other element,
characters are introduced, and most of whom are killed off by the end of the issue. I don't know if we'll ever see the Fukuda, who heads the Japanese office, again. I can't remember that either. And we're also peeling away some layers of Planetary. Like, this is the first time we learn that they have offices in every big city in the world, or seemingly, which, judging by the next issue, might become kind of a regular thing. But
it shows the reach, but it also establishes. Yeah, it's a really good move. And I was going to say, the other element we haven't really talked about is the cover. Keeping in mind that this is the second issue, none of our protagonists are on the cover. It's these guys and this giant dinosaur skeleton chasing it. Like, very compelling, but very not how anybody else would be doing a cover. And
it doesn't look at all like the cover of the first issue.
Right.
a different logo. And I'm guessing that this logo reads Planetary in Japanese.
Sure.
And it kind of looks like it's a Japanese movie poster that then for the American audience, they just sort of, rather than removing the Japanese text, they just wrote English text over it. So we see,
which is how a lot of that's done.
Japanese text, and then over it says action, terror, fun. And then we see a word balloon, and underneath it says that the word balloon is saying, I think we shall run. And of course, this is not even a scene from inside, which also makes me think of those kind of, cheaply imported movies where they have a painting, like B movies where they have painting of something that looks really fantastic, and that scene isn't really in the movie.
Right.
Because there's no skeleton chasing people through explosions.
But even though that's not in the comic, it informs the comic in a very unique way. And it's
exactly. It puts you in the mood for the comic book in the first place.
Yeah.
You're in the world of a translated movie already.
Yeah, it's not just your titular main characters posing on the cover again.
Which is what the first issue was.
Right.
It had the 3 main characters posing on the cover. And I think somewhere in here, it's revealed to us that Chiquita, and probably Drummer, didn't know about Winter's powers and abilities. So everybody's a mystery to everyone else, in a sense. Everyone has these layers. You're telling me your precious 4th man didn't know about me, says Winter. Oh, I'm sure he did, says Chiquita. They just didn't tell us. Didn't tell us. Okay, I've seen, now tell. And then she goes into this was what interested me. She goes into various theories as to why these monsters exist, whether it's because of nuclear explosions or doorways to other universes that have been opened, or a mutagen, a doorway open from parallel Earths, or extraterrestrials that impacted here. So they don't know, but 5 years after the atomic bomb, this island was occupied with monsters. And then they died off in the mid-70s. And I don't know if that's a cultural reference. Had maybe the monster movie genre died off for a while. I mean, obviously it's big and back now, but
I mean, there's kind of always been Godzilla movies, but when they were most popular or whatnot, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, probably the 60s and 70s. There were a lot of them, and then it died back for a while, and then they had a big comeback, probably in the 90s already.
Well, I mean, they were always doing them. I mean, there's more Godzilla movies than any other film franchise of all time. So,
then maybe that's just the 70s thing is not a reference to the movies.
Well, it might be to relative popularity, right? Though I think.
Well, shall we look at issue 3? And if we think of any more thoughts, we can always come back to issue 2.
Sure. So maybe we should start with the cover this time.
Yeah, issue 2 does. Yeah, that's a good idea. Issue 2 has a very distinctive and yet a completely different cover with the very small, plain-looking logo that's at the same size as the names of the creators. And it's framed in a sort of it's like a what do you call it when you have an old-fashioned TV and it's letterboxed? It's like a letterboxed picture.
Can you tip it? Because my comic, I don't know if you'll see it. I mean, here you can barely see it, but there's the other Planetary logo like in black against the black.
Oh yeah, I didn't even notice that. Holy cow! Yeah, I don't know if it'll come across on the camera, but yeah, it's just barely visible, like black on black. Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. You have much better eyes than I do.
Well, I might just have better lighting in here.
And in the picture, we're seeing someone kind of leaping over a car and shooting off both guns at the same time as he's leaping, which I don't know if I immediately put it together, but it it brings up images of John Woo movies in my head. Except that I don't remember any John Woo movies with ghosts. But other than that.
Well, and there's no doves.
No doves, right? I forgot about the doves in John Woo movies.
I'm really curious because when I open the trade, the first thing I see is an ad for issue 3. No, okay. So my guess is this was an ad that was run that you were supposed to have probably seen somewhere.
Huh. I don't
But
think my trade has it. Because I also have it. I have the omnibus, and that just has the cover facing the first page.
Yeah,
so there's just all these different versions.
Yeah, so it's very in a Hong Kong movie.
Oh, I'm jealous that we don't have that. I wonder if it's in the back matter or something.
Oh, maybe.
Hopefully.
Should be fine.
That seems silly not to include that right there.
Yeah, but there's a legend in Hong Kong about a murdered cop back for revenge. Planetary discovers the legend is true. Planetary 3.
Interesting. Maybe it's at the back of... Nope. I was thinking maybe it's at the back of issue 2. In the back of issue 2, we see spectral policemen and thundering guns, hundreds of bullets and buckets of blood. On the streets of Hong Kong, the cop who returned from death to bring righteous justice and vengeance to the streets was thought of as just another urban myth. Planetary finds out otherwise. Dead Gunfighters, coming soon from Ellis, Cassaday, and Depuy.
Right.
So we got all these different versions.
Well, in issue 3 already, this one is very much like a Hong Kong movie, and relatively, for most any comics I've ever read outside of a Daniel Way comic, very light on dialogue overall.
Yes.
Very little reading. It's very action oriented, very heavy on the imagery. And the fact that Ellis trusted Cassaday here with that level of this is like, this is a gamble. And
maybe trust is the right word. Maybe they are now working together. You know, Ellis can see what Cassaday can do and what he makes of his scripts. I don't know. This modern Ellis is a lot of, more recent Ellis that I've read is like this with a very minimal dialogue.
Yeah,
what struck me for the first few pages is everything is in a widescreen shot, like we're in a movie on the big, ultra widescreen movie screen. And then, so every single page after page, it's these 4 widescreen panels until I'm trying to find it because there's a lot of pages until Planetary shows up right here.
And the other difference,
suddenly it's a vertical panel and the coloring is different.
Right. The black background is also a big part of that feel. And then Planetary shows up and it's suddenly a white background. Right. And it's really funny because if you look at the trade from the top, you can see a little section that's just all black. It's set apart from everything else. It's stand out.
Yeah, I think that was in my it kind of stands out in my comic too. But so the whole action sequence is very intense and very well sort of the cinematographer was doing a very good job here. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I've taken, especially as I've done a number of Ninja Turtle threads recently, I've been taking a closer look at more of the action in comics, the actual fights, because so much of what we read, superheroes, action, adventure stuff, whatever, it's very action heavy, but comic books aren't usually the best medium to actually display a fight in, because a fight's all about motion, and that's the one thing comics don't actually convey in minute proportions. And so when it's done well, I think it really stands out. And there's something about it here that was very compelling. I think a lot of it's due to the coloring.
I agree. Although I have to say, in the original comic, the coloring was very dark. The paper couldn't quite handle it. So it looks much better in my trade, better in the digital version. But yes, the coloring is very intense and adds to that sort of, I don't know, that impact of the action. And like the way she colors the dead woman. It's never explained. I guess they killed her because they like to kill whores, they're saying. But it might have been one of the women of one of their crime enemies. I wasn't totally clear on all the crime stuff that was going on.
Look, they killed a woman, and that's bad. And this ghost is here for revenge. I think that's the important part. But no, it's good to question those sorts of details. And I don't know if it's stronger that we don't necessarily get every detail here, because we're able to kind of fill in most of the gap, but I still
right. It's kind of like we're seeing a highlight from a movie in a sense.
Yeah,
we don't know the whole story, and that's part of the point, I think, because we do fill in some of the story in conversation with the ghost towards the end of the book.
It's funny too, because the action in that panel right there, where the ghost is doing this thing with double pistols in the car,
crossed hands, right?
Yeah, and then cross hands, reminds me of an exact sequence in this old Taskmaster mini.
Oh, really?
Where Taskmaster has two guys train pistols on him, and he says, "Hey, guess what I watched last night?" And they're like, "What?" A Chung-Yo Fat Marathon just like flips on him and does basically that maneuver. And it's very much in that Hong Kong action vein. And here it is portrayed in another comic. It just was a weird connection.
I wonder who, I mean, obviously Chow Yun-Fat and John Woo did it first, but wonder who first brought it to comics.
I mean,
is the Taskmaster older than this?
It's not older than this, but it's not far off either.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense that Taskmaster, who he would pick up things from movies.
Well, this mini wrote Taskmaster differently than he's been written in anything else, except for the Deadpool issues that it was connected to. It's when he has the udon blue hoodie look. It's almost a different character, but that's a different thing.
You almost forget you're reading a Planetary comic. You just feel like you're reading this crime comic. And my brain is going, wait a minute, it's a ghost, and cars go through him, but his guns shoot bullets that kill people. And I guess they're kind of magical flame bullets.
Yeah, this has Vengeance Ghost written all over it. Right. Very evocative of ghost lore, but using the tools of this idea.
I guess he's a Hong Kong action hero, but he's also like Ghost Rider and the Spectre and other people like that.
Yeah.
Vengeance from Beyond.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, we're looking at this great panel where the ghostly burning bullet goes right through the guy's head from ear to ear, and his whole face kind of explodes in flames.
And the only dialogue on that page, "Oh no.
Oh no." Oh, and the bullet makes a right angle turn to get him
right through his head.
So there's a certain sort of anything goes feel to this wild ghost story. I would like to see the whole movie. Of course.
Well, and what's also really cool with this in connection with the last issue is what makes Planetary so exciting is the stories issue by issue are compelling on their own right. And yeah, we want to know the mystery and what's going on with Planetary, but that's usually taking a back seat. That's usually the B story. Right. And so that's what's connecting us. But each issue kind of stands on its own merit. And so it's incredible world building, and it's just master storytelling through and through
Right.
as we build the larger narrative. And it's an
Right.
old formula, but it works, and
But
less
done with a
people use it
newer
than you
kind of
think.
finesse, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like, there's this coolness to every story being at least one different genre, if not two genres mashed together, like in issue 2. And this might even be a mashing of genres if there is. It's hard for me to know for sure if there is kind of a mashing of the Hong Kong gun opera kind of movie with these supernatural kind of stories that we're more familiar with in comics. But then I love when they, like, my whole idea that part of the story is our 3 main characters, who aren't the center of any given issue, or so it's beginning to seem, are kind of like tourists who think all this is kind of cool. Because Winter says, "I'll be damned. All that weekly world news crap the local office sent us, all the gibberish about the Phantom Cop of Hong Kong." And then Chiquita says, "Did you see that? That was incredible." And the drummer says, "Real life ghosty. Cool."
And
I'm starting to think the drummer's British to say ghosty and not ghost, but who knows?
This is the second time you've brought it up where I feel like maybe Ellis has kind of let some Britishisms kind of like slip in.
Well, I have this not very rational personal obsession with an annoyance at the Brit authors who think they know what America's all about. And Neil Gaiman wrote American Gods. Warren Ellis and Alan Moore.
What's your beef with American Gods?
I don't know. I didn't think it was that American.
It's primarily dealing with,
and ultimately it was focused on Norse gods. The American gods were kind of off to the side. But anyway, I'm not saying any of this stuff is bad, but Alan Moore named his own comic book line America's Best Comics. And so I just have this little beef with the Brits thinking they're experts on America.
I never connected that. And now I just see it as the snide. Oh, see, I was too dumb an American to get it.
And longtime listeners to this podcast will remember when we were doing Transmetropolitan, which was also by Warren Ellis. Mm-hmm. and there was a moment where they were in a slum, and I was saying, that doesn't look like a slum in America. That looks like a slum in England. Everyone was white. And I'm not trying to make a statement that there are poor white slums in America, but if you are thinking of slums in America, there's going to be a lot of different racial types in there. And that's just another example. But I'm overly sensitive, or have this radar out to the Brits whenever they're thinking they're being American and they're not.
Well, I'm glad you're defending our honor.
It's not even a matter of honor. I'm not sure. I imagine, though, if most comics by Americans were set in England, the Brits would be constantly noticing that it sounds off or what have you. In fact, some Brit was complaining to me about when Chris Claremont was doing Excalibur and set in England and didn't really know what he was doing, even though Chris Claremont likes to brag how he's really British. So all of that is neither here nor there.
No, that was all fascinating. I loved every second of that. I'd love to hear.
I have a chip on my shoulder against, because we live in America and that's like where stories are set so much. Other countries don't have to deal with, all these interpretations of people who think they know all about. I'm sure Warren Ellis and Neil Gaiman in particular spent a lot of time in the U.S., but there's some people who think they know all about our country because they've watched TV and movies.
That's pretty much how I've done it.
Well, I'm glad at least once in your life you got to come to Portland, Oregon and see a different side of things than the TV and movie side.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too because so many shows are shot in Vancouver.
Yes.
So
pretending to the U.S. Yes.
I
Oh,
where were
so
we?
on that note, we did get our revenge. With my daughter, we were watching this kids show that took place in London, and we suddenly realized they were using parts of Portland, Oregon as London, which is totally unconvincing.
That's very weird.
It's very weird. So anyway, here we are back in the story. We now are at the Hong Kong office, where the person who runs the Hong Kong office says, "I can't believe you're actually here. I've been in this office 6 years, and the field team has never been here."
Mm-hmm.
And the Chiquita questions her 6 years, and she says,
Right.
"Sure, I was 16 when I started here 6 years. Excuse me, I'm burping. 6 years ago." So she's 23. I don't know. That's an odd detail. I don't know if that will ever mean anything, but that she started working there at age 16.
Well, I think it's to validate that she's not rounding or making some weird mistake. It's more like convincing Chiquita, because the fact that it's 6 years, that's the longest any of them have heard anyone admit working for Planetary. Normally it was 4 years.
Right.
And so it's again that mystery that they're all keeping from themselves. They barely know anything
Right.
about the organization. How long it's been around is even a question.
Yeah. It's an odd thing that they're all working for it without really knowing what they're doing.
Yeah, though I guess the money's good enough.
Oh, in the next panel, Drummer says again, "You're genuine ghosty, ooga booga." Another popular American phrase.
Well, there's two things. A, the drummer's supposed to be psychotic or crazy or whatever.
Which causes you to speak in a more British way, yes.
And nobody likes it.
Yes.
And I think this is part of the reason why.
I think one of the least successful things is Drummer being portrayed as this sort of annoying, possibly slightly crazy guy.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's the way he's drawn, but he looks kind of like a cool Hollywood actor. Excuse me.
I think the drummer is interesting in that he's very similar to the doctor from The Authority in a lot of ways. And so in a lot of ways, Snow is very similar to Jenny Sparks. And so like clearly Ellis had these ideas rotating his head that he really wanted to play with, but they were just a little too similar. And so to differentiate them, they took on some odd characteristics. And I don't think all of them are successful.
Yeah. But maybe the drummer's portrayal will become richer later. I think at the moment I'm more believing more in the characters of Winter and Chiquita, if I'm saying her name right.
Right. My favorite detail from all that exchange was Snow looking over the crowd. Damn noise. You know what I liked? Bluegrass. Bluegrass was fun. It's just so incongruous with everything else, but
because
really
there's
colors
like a disco across the street or something.
Yeah. Or EDM, who knows?
It says disco there.
Oh, well, there you go.
I don't know if that's the thing across the street, actually.
Do they always play disco at a disco, though?
No. Yeah. That's a good point. And who
DJs
knows
all night, every
in
night.
Hong Kong, if it's something says disco, what it means. Because I haven't been to Hong Kong.
Neither have I.
But you've been to Japan, so you should have been an expert on the last issue, but you weren't. So a lot of the gist of the conversation is that this young girl thought the whole cop story was an urban myth.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they saw it right away as soon as they arrived in Hong Kong. And then they, with the help of Drummer's ability to somehow tap into technology, but also other things, they track down track him down again. But before he shows up, Drummer tells Chiquita to stomp on the ground.
Yeah.
And that causes some kind of I don't know, some kind of ripple effect of electricity or something, and then Drummer can sense something down below. This is old information. It's a machine, but I can't make out what kind of. And then he says, maybe we should stand back a minute. And then this giant structure comes out of the ground. I think it's a ghost structure. I don't know if it's supposed to be like literally there on a total physical plane.
And Drummer doing this, to get to my earlier point again, is very reminiscent of Jack Hawksmoor, again from The Authority.
Right, Jack Hawksmoor, who can communicate with cities.
Right.
Yes, very much so. Was Jack Hawksmoor created by the original Image creator? Was that
Image creator?
Was he created by Jim Lee, or was he one of those other early Image creators, or was he created by Warren Ellis?
I thought it was Ellis. I'm going to look it up real quick because I don't know.
On the building is this pattern, which I took to be like a bunch of flowers Ellis. At first, but then if you look closer at it, the pattern is actually a bunch of human bodies, sort of all, each one sort of in a tumbling position, all in different angles, tumbling around as a decoration, seemingly on the building. But it also brings back slightly reminiscent of the snowflake pattern that they found in the first issue, which was some kind of multi-dimensional computer.
So would you call this a buttress?
A buttress is something that holds up another building?
Well, it's also just a bunch of butts and looks like
butts in need of address. Yeah, the figures may be naked or what have you. Yeah, probably naked, but not drawn in. They're just like little shadow figures. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't even notice this until just now, actually. I just saw a decoration and I didn't put it together. I did vaguely sense by the coloration and then by the dialogue we get later that it relates to the snowflake. Because the ghost shows up and calls it God, and then says it's an unimaginably huge, an object with more than 100,000 different angles. And then Drummer says 196,833 maybe, which was the number of worlds that the snowflake computer, the quantum computer that was the snowflake, was flipping through in the first issue. So somehow, perhaps this ghost Avenger is linked to our mysterious snowflake.
Right.
But we don't know. We don't get any more answers than that.
Well, it could just be that, I mean, he's there because this force is there allowing for some tap to the supernatural. So we don't know.
Then he talks, then he just talks about himself in a sense, about how his partner killed him, not for any particular reason, but because he didn't really like him. And he says he was brought back for vengeance, not just for me, but for all of us. And he also says ask them to talk to his beloved and tell her to make the most of life because there's nothing in the afterlife. So even though he has an afterlife, he's seen what the afterlife for everyone else is, and it's just nothingness. But something, I guess what he's calling God, which is this thing with 100,000 different angles to it, is keeping him alive to just get vengeance all over Hong Kong, not just against the people who did him wrong, until another cop dies and takes his place. And then I guess one of the bad guys, or is it the cop who killed him maybe, shows up, and Jaquita actually takes action and kicks his car, kicks the motor out of his car, actually. Which is the first actual action that any one of our heroes has taken in the first 3 issues.
Yeah, and he gets a whole page.
It's a splash page. But then the guy is, I think, taken out by the ghost cop.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Huge frog in my throat. He said, never shot an unarmed man, never put bullets in a criminal's back. You people came looking for a mystery, but there is none, says the ghost. There's just us. And then Drummer says, did he say justice? And Winter says, no, just us. And that's kind of the end of the story. And we're seeing a pattern now with 3 issues of every story, you're getting part of a story. And then kind of a walk off into the sunset kind of moment of one form or another. It's all kind of elusive. You know, you get a sense of a story, a sense of a mystery, partially solved, but not fully solved in the individual issue, plus the more clues, but not really so far helpful clues in the larger mystery, or at least most of them aren't helpful
Right.
seeming yet. And in the end, we return to the cinematic staging of the page.
Well, because it's our ghost story again.
Right. It's almost like our characters walked into the movie and got to talk with the characters before the movie ended.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, these 2 issues, more than the first issue, set a tone for me of these elusive, fascinating stories full of references that maybe I get, maybe I don't get, that just makes me want to read more. And I just kind of love this story within story format. It's something that, when done well, always kind of hooks me in.
Yeah, it's all good, and I don't know, I'm itching for the next.
Yeah, so I think we should just continue with 2 stories. So we'll do issues 4 and 5 next.
All right.
And we'll see what those bring for us. Oh, an interesting thing in my omnibus is at the beginning of each story, before you see the cover, there's a pull quote from each story. So from the story about the Gaiju Island and the cult leader, there's a quote that says, "These are our dreams, Jun. They lay here sleeping. They offer us welcome within their very bodies." And then it says Ryu, which was the name of the cult leader. So since there's multiple meanings there, because I think maybe Warren Ellis, if he's the one who chose these pull quotes, is sort of telling us that these stories, these different stories that he's drawing on, are the dreams of our culture. And they offer us welcome. They draw us in. Now, Ryu literally wants to eat the body of the monsters before he gets killed in that story. And then the pullout for the Hong Kong story is, after there's nothing, do you see? There's no sin, no hell for our bastards to burn in, no great punishment in the next life for the killers and rapists. Shek Chi Wei. So that's I don't see specifically how that applies to the overarching thing, but so it might just be an editor pulled those out because he thought they made a cool way to space out the stories in the book. I assume your trade does not have that,
It does not.
but it had that movie poster instead.
Yeah, I'd rather have the movie poster.
So yeah, the mysteries deepen. We're deep in the world of stories. This is for people who love stories, right? As opposed to people who love answers at the moment. I mean, hopefully we will get some kinds of answers, but I assume we won't get everything answered by the end.
No, but I think there's just a lot of acceptance too.
Yeah.
Of, we're in the story, and so you just kind of have to run along with it. And as long as you kind of have that instinct, I think this clicks better than someone's who's going to be questioning, like, well, how'd they become a ghost? Like, you should just be able to kind of get there.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to get those kinds of answers. But it's also, it's not like you picking up an Agatha Christie whodunit and you just read chapter after chapter as the clues build up so you can figure out who the murderer is or something.
Right.
There's a letter at the back of issue 3 on the letters page. Someone named Denny Dukes writes in and says, I like Planetary #1 and think it's a very interesting series. I just hope it's in its own universe, not sharing with the rest of the Wildstorm characters. It'll make the series that much stronger, I think. Looking forward to more, Denny Dukes. And they write back, sorry, Denny, but Planetary does indeed exist within the Wildstorm universe. But this doesn't mean we're going to bump into Caitlin Fairchild and Grifter every other issue. No, instead, we're going to show you how big the Wildstorm universe is, how much mystery and weirdness has gone on that you had no idea about. From what we've read so far, I find that facetious. I don't feel like it is exploring the Wildstorm universe.
I don't think it is either, because I don't think you could be talking about kaiju and or all these gates or anything and not mention like the demonites or how the cities are actually personified or any of the other things.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be the actual main characters of the other series, but there's certain aspects of that universe that are set up that affect all those other books. The existence of the demonites affects everything in Wildstorm at some point. Not here so much. And maybe
it's
we're not
more
there
at
yet.
play with the culture of our world.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, everything we're seeing so far anyway.
We're also only 3 issues in.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose after this, someone writing in the Wildstorm world could then imagine that there is someone who looks like Doc Savage and bring in these characters. Ironically, later on, I haven't read them, but they crossed over with the Justice League and with Batman, I think, after DC bought up Wildstorm.
I think some of that was before.
Before DC bought up Wildstorm?
Yeah, like there was a big Batman issue, and I think that was
before the purchase.
I think so.
Oh, maybe. I mean, they love to team Batman up with other popular series. I guess. I mean, it's in my trade here, but I don't know if it will say when the issue came out.
Well, I don't remember exactly when the buyout
Planetary
happened.
Batman, Night on Earth. I mean, there's the splash page or cover. I'm not sure which.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Well, here's some Wildstorm characters. I'm just been flipping through the omnibus and saw them. So maybe we will see something of the Wildstorm. Oh, there was a Planetary Authority crossover later on, which was interesting since you're pointing out the parallels between some of the characters.
But I mean, if they had a designated
pretty sure those are
crossover,
afterthoughts. Sorry?
If they had a designated crossover, that means they're having as much relation to the Authority as they do to Batman.
Right. That's a good point. Let me see if the table of contents gives the... oh, no. Is there a table of contents? There is no table of contents. So there's nothing to give like the dates when things came out. Yeah, there was a Planetary Batman a planetary JLA, and a planetary authority. Anyway, as far as I can tell from what we're reading so far, we don't really need to worry about this Wildstorm universe, I don't think.
Well, we'll just carry on and see what it brings
Yes.
us.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll return from the dead pretty soon this time to talk about those next 2 issues.
Should be good.
Yeah. Well, bye-bye, Matt.
Bye.